Hello, everyone. Welcome to my remote presentation entitled Admonitores non nimis verecundi, Personhood and Personification in Cicero's Letters. Now, authorship has long been thought of as a solitary activity. When we pick up a book, we often assume we are accessing the thoughts of the person whose name is on its spine. Consequently, the scene of writing is often depicted as a one-man show. One such depiction comes to us from a 14th century manuscript illustration from the Bodleian Library. A man sits at a writing desk flanked by the physical apparatus of scholarship. A cabinet fills a quarter of the frame. Its doors cracked open to reveal 7 bound volumes. On the desk, 2 more lie open on a bookstand, which the author consults as he lines a new page with his left hand and inscribes it with his right. The author here acts as the singular force behind the creation of the text, completely in control of every aspect of its production. As we will see, however, even when the author seems to be alone, writing is always the product of a community. So let's zoom out a bit. This manuscript contains Cicero's Somnium Scipionis, a passage in the 6th book of the De Republica in which a fictional Scipio Africanus recounts a prophetic dream and its philosophical implications. It pairs this text with another, Macrobius's commentary on said dream passage, written over a century later. The inclusion of these 2 authors' work in this single volume means that this scene, so emphatic in its assertion that the author works alone, precedes a volume that contains the work of 2 people at the very least. Our eyes actually don't even have to travel far before we see another authorial figure nestled into the curve of that initial C and pointing back at the scene of the text composition. Does this second figure depict Macrobius looking back at Cicero as he wrote, a literalization of the act of textual commentary? Or is this Cicero anticipating Macrobius poring over the De Republica years later? Already, the pages of this text are getting crowded with authorial figures, with even more waiting in the wings. The text begins to look more like a node around which an entire network of people gathers than the definitive trace of any one individual's thoughts or actions. The person at the center of the network pictured here, Marcus Tullius Cicero, was more than aware of this feature of textuality, even extending the connective power of text beyond the human into the books themselves. In the aftermath of his loss at the Battle of Pharsalus, a defeat that broke Pompey Magnus's resistance to Julius Caesar, Cicero greeted his books as long-lost friends. Know that as soon as I came into the city, I got myself back into the good graces of my old friends, that is, my books. I hadn't cut short our intimacy because I was angry at them, but rather because they caused me to feel shame. Cicero's relationship with his books was complicated. It's clear from this passage that they'd had a falling out and were only just beginning to patch things up. The sight of his books once shamed Cicero, sub pudebat. Pudor, the noun from which this verb is derived, can be translated as shame, but as Robert Castor argues, its valence is much more expansive. He puts it as the feeling of someone saying, do you see the people looking at you? Do you like that? And I'm really quite familiar with that sentiment. Such a feeling was integral to the social life of the late Republic, as it is possibly the 2022 SCS meeting. Cicero's books made him feel this community-oriented emotion. Therefore, this passage displays an awareness that books are not only links between social actors, but can be conceived of as social actors in and of themselves. Cicero wrote this passage to Marcus Terentius Varro, a fellow intellectual and fellow former member of Pompey's faction against Caesar. This was the first in a series of letters in which Cicero attempted to gain Varro's open approval and support after the war, a series that culminated with Cicero's dedication to Varro of a 4-volume philosophical treatise, the Academici Libri. In that work's first volume, Varro's own books are said to belong to a collective like the one Cicero outlined above, one that connects books and humans. Cicero's character in the dialogue addressing Varro's has this to say about the other scholars' previous publications. For as I wandered in our city, lost like a foreigner, your books brought me home, as it were, such that I was able to know who and where I was. Much like the old friends in his library, Cicero endows Varro's books with minds of their own. Cicero's personification of these texts reveals that books could act as friends and deserve the same care in return, care that Cicero hoped would bind Varro and others to his cause. Cicero expands on the political utility of such a virtual community in another letter to Varro, dated April 22nd, 46 BCE. Only this thing remains for us, to live together in our studies, which we used to pursue for pleasure, now for safety. To not be absent if anyone wants to turn towards us from building the Republic, not only as architects, but even as craftsmen, and rather to freely rush forth to do so, to write and read republics, even if no one makes use of the work. And although we can do so less in the forum and in the curia, to govern the state and seek rules and laws in letters and books, as the learned men did of old. In this passage, Cicero proposes an alternate world in which he and Varro could live together in study, in studiis. The operative word here, however, is together, una. In the political climate of 46 BCE, gathering was no easy thing for two former members of Pompey's army. In the virtual space of study, where the difficulties obstructing communication and free movement were eliminated, Cicero and Varro could build a parallel state unaffected by the turmoil of Caesar's rise. The voices from the past, the friends on the shelves of Cicero's library, linked him to others in the present and provided a site for imagining an alternate future. In my comments today, I would like to chart Cicero's attempts to live together with Varro through the production of a text, the aforementioned Academici Libri. This enigmatic work has the distinction of being the most extensively documented composition in Cicero's correspondence. We'll begin with a peculiar instance of textual personification in Cicero's dedication of the work to Varro. The Academici Libri, in stark contrast to the other personified books examined above, do not guide, advise, and conciliate. Instead, they disobey. On the 11th of July in the year 45 CE, Cicero wrote Varro to present him with the 4 volumes of the Academici Libri, and he introduces it this way. Not even the people are accustomed to demand a gift unless prodded, even though someone has offered one. I, on the other hand, am so moved by the anticipation of your promised work that I am prompting, not begging you. I have, however, sent for prompters who are not so bashful. Indeed, you already know the face of this younger academy. I have sent these ones summoned from its very center, who I fear might beg you, though I've instructed them only to ask. This passage is animated by Cicero's fear to cross a boundary that dictates how one Roman man should ask another for something. We can see the delineation of this boundary in the difference between 2 words, rogare and flagitare, to ask and to beg or importune. Into the gap between civil and uncivil conduct, Cicero places the dedicated treatise, its 4 volumes personified as the 4 Admonitores, a word derived from admonere, to warn, remind, or as I've translated it here, prompt. Unlike the personified books we saw earlier, these texts are not friendly. Their actions threaten to defy Cicero's request for politeness and erupt into a more violent action than he himself intended, to flagitare rather than rogare. Instead of using a shared friendship with books to draw Varro towards him in this letter, Cicero hopes the other scholar will join him in castigating the bad behavior of his own writing. In the following section, we will turn to the early composition history of this text, as recorded in Cicero's letters to Atticus in the months leading up to his dedication. An examination of how the Academici Libri were pieced together reveals other disobedient figures that were later mirrored in Cicero's personification of the finished draft. In a letter to Atticus from June 23rd of 45 BCE, Cicero confided to his friend that Varro had promised to dedicate a work of scholarship to him, a volume of what would turn out to be the De Lingua Latina. A dedication from Varro meant a great deal. It was, after all, the dedication of a volume of the Antiquitates Rerum Divinarum that secured Varro his own pardon from Caesar months before Cicero's. In the same moment that Cicero informed his friend of Varro's promise, however, he also revealed that it had been 2 years since he had heard anything about it. To hurry Varro along, Cicero decided that he would dedicate a work of his own to the other scholar. Cicero had 2 works in final revisions, but one of them, the De Finibus, was already promised to Brutus. This left the other finished treatise, a 2-book dialogue on the philosophy of the Academy, which was dedicated to the recently deceased patricians Lucullus and Catullus. These books had already been copied and sent to Atticus for final comments, but now Cicero would need to rewrite the work to include Varro. A day later, and this is the passage you see on your screen, Cicero had decided on an ambitious course of action, a new draft of the entire text. Roused by what you wrote me about Varro in your letter, I have taken the whole Academy from the aristocrats, that is, Lucullus and Catullus, and transferred it to our companion, Varro, and have put it from 2 books into 4. These 4 books would become the Quatuor Admonitores, the personified books of the Academici Libri that made their way to Varro in July. Cicero's correspondence with Atticus over the month it took to send Varro the finished treatise is full of anxiety about Varro's intentions. Cicero's worries reached their apex on July 1st, 10 days before he would send along the finished manuscript, when he wrote Atticus in response to a troubling rumor. "Tell me, did you decide to publish without my say-so? Do you think it right to give my work to anyone besides Brutus, to whom I dedicated it under your influence? Balbus wrote to me that he copied down the 5th book of the De Finibus for you. I haven't changed much in it, but I have changed a few things. You would do well to hold back the rest, lest Balbus have an uncorrected copy and Brutus have a stale one." The fifth book of the De Finibus had leaked, for lack of a better word, and it seemed to have come from a working draft that was in Atticus's possession. Cicero's response to these events provides an important caveat to the vision of collaboration and community that we see elsewhere in his writing. Despite ostensibly changing the subject at the end of this passage, Cicero could not help but return to the real reason he wrote. And this is from the same letter. In fact, it's the next sentence. "What else is there? I've been in such a hurry to send Varro what I've written at your urging that I've just now sent it to Rome to be copied. If you choose, you can have it right away. I also wrote to the scribes that your men had the authority to copy it if you wanted. But please keep it to yourself until I see you." Cicero worried that what happened to the De Finibus would happen to the Academici Libri, again drove home the importance of keeping drafts secret. This too would have made an elegant end to this discussion, but Cicero pushed the subject further. "How did I forget to tell you? Amazingly, Chaerelia, positively on fire with enthusiasm for philosophy, has been copying from your people. She has the same damn book of the De Finibus." The leaked volume of the De Finibus had also made its way into the hands of Chaerelia, a wealthy woman who was a reader of Cicero's philosophy and sometimes even acted as his patron. As the only woman named explicitly as a philosophical interlocutor by Cicero, Chaerelia occupied an especially tense position in the social ecosystem that had grown up around his intellectual work. Atticus was cagey about her, warning Cicero that it was not a good idea to remain in debt to her. He even suggested that she and Cicero had engaged in an affair, much to Cicero's frustration. Cicero's pejorative tone towards Chaerelia here must be read with all the gendered expectations that Roman reading culture exerted on their relationship in mind. Cicero's comments were designed to set her apart from his other collaborators. She is studio flagrans, on fire with enthusiasm, that is, studium, the same emotion that Cicero used to link himself and Varro. Cicero and Varro could very well live together in studium, but Chaerelia was burning alone. Chaerelia was not part of the community that Cicero had hoped to build with these texts. As R.W. McCutcheon argues, Chaerelia's involvement undermines Cicero's careful construction of his philosophy as a place to build a new Roman Republic. And this is because of one simple fact, that women could not openly participate in Roman politics. As such, Cicero treated Chaerelia less like his patron and more like an outsider, a woman so eager to claim a space in the intellectual community facilitated by his writing that she snuck out a copy before it was even finished. But Chaerelia did not do this alone. She had to get the draft of the De Finibus from someone. Here, Cicero is careful not to blame Atticus directly, but to shift responsibility onto the group that his anxiety and our analysis has been closing in on, the enslaved workers who have been busy copying the manuscript. These are the tui, your people, from whom Chaerelia is said to have acquired her copy. We will never know what effect Chaerelia's intervention in the transmission of the De Finibus had on the text itself. The textual tradition bears no remnant of whatever variant she introduced by copying it at an unfinished stage. However, we can ascertain something about the other work that Cicero was worried about, the Academici Libri. And from this, we can say that the scribes in Atticus's workshop did not stop their dissemination of Cicero's early drafts. As it has been transmitted to modernity, the Academici Libri's text is split in two. The first book, still mostly complete, reflects the revisions that we've been discussing. Varro is the interlocutor, and the conversation takes place in Cicero's villa at Cumae. The rest of the work has been lost, reduced to scant fragments. Despite this, the remainder of the argument still survives in what is now known as the Lucullus, a partially preserved copy of the version before the revisions took place, when Lucullus and Catullus were still the dedicatees and principal characters. The preservation of the different disparate halves of this work, each obviously at a different editorial stage, is a matter of extensive debate. However, scholars of this textual history agree on one point. The draft form in which the second half of Cicero's argument survives, the Lucullus, came from an unauthorized leak, much like the one Cicero wrote to Atticus about that day in the summer of 45. The text that we read as Cicero's then has been molded by other hands, hands whose work Cicero hoped to conceal. The unruly books of the Academici Libri show us a vision of Cicero's life and letters that is colored by frustration. His hopes for living together with Varro in their studies, for developing a new political collective with his philosophical work, did not materialize in Cicero's lifetime. However, Cicero's loss of control over this text reveals another collective that surrounded his literary output, a group of workers that made his status as an author possible. Cicero's texts really did become sites for people to gather, although they were perhaps not the group that he intended. By attending to the people hidden at the edges of literary history, we can begin to outline a model for Cicero's Republican letters that incorporates the individuals that he wished to exclude from it. As Cicero would have put it himself, writing is never something that is done alone. Texts create communities and are themselves created communally. The authorial Cicero is thus a composite figure, one made up not only of the contacts that he himself wanted to make, but also those he sought to marginalize. Thank you. And here's a list of further reading that I have made great use of in putting this presentation together and in my other research. Thank you so much for listening.